This is All About Bitcoin, a show dedicated to all things questions and markets related to Bitcoin, little b for the currency, and Bitcoin, big B for the network. A collective journey to understand, apply, and use this innovation, all Bitcoin, all the time. I'm your host, Christine Lee. Let's have a live look at Bitcoin right now. The CoinDesk Bitcoin price XCX index at $42,150. Bitcoin sliding back just about 1% over the past 24 hours. The most reliable reference prices for institutions since 2014 are now published under the CoinDesk brand, trusted globally as the leader in crypto news events and data.
The chart of the day is brought to you by Crypto.com, the world's fastest growing crypto app.
Bitcoin's correlation to the S&P 500 hitting a 17-month high. The debate over Bitcoin's value as a digital gold safe haven asset or a risky investment is heating up as BTC's sensitivity to stock markets increases. Arcane Research noting the 90-day correlation between Bitcoin and Wall Street's benchmark equity index, the S&P 500, rising to 0.49 points on Friday, the highest since October of 2020. The correlation has strengthened alongside a relentless tightening of the U.S. Treasury yield curve, a sign the Fed may have a hard time avoiding much feared stagflation with rapid-fire interest rate rises without destabilizing the economy. The yield curve is now just 20 basis points short of inversion or turning negative, an unusual setup that's often viewed as a recession indicator. The rising correlation comes as some analysts in traditional financial markets are starting to argue that stocks might actually serve as a decent hedge against inflation, since companies could theoretically raise prices to protect their profit margins. It's a shift in focus that brings the stock market narrative closer to that of Bitcoin, which has long been viewed by many investors as a potential hedge against fast rising prices or a depreciating U.S. dollar. All right, joining us now to discuss BTC price and more is CoinDesk market analyst Damanick Dantes. Hey there, Damanick in New York. All right, so I'd love to hear your outlook on BTC price amid rising inflation, rate hikes, and global uncertainty over Russia's war in Ukraine.
Yeah, given all those macro headwinds, it becomes more sensitive, like you said, to the equity markets. It's a risk asset. So what we're seeing now is like a slight relief rally of sorts, similar to the S&P 500. We really saw it was led by Asia markets over the past 2 weeks when, China and Hong Kong got extremely oversold. So we saw a lot of that pick up now. Shorts are exiting positions. So it gives you about a few months of seasonal performance into sort of higher resistance levels. So what you're seeing now is a higher trading range for Bitcoin. It was previously around 28K to 35K, and now I'm expecting between 40 and 50K. And that gives you some short-term upside.
What kind of insights are you getting from the futures market?
Futures market has been pretty stable. We saw open interest pretty much flatline this year. And I think we have a chart on that. This, the upper panel just shows the open interest, Bitcoin and the futures market. And below that is the 30-day volatility of that open interest. So you can see volatility is at extreme lows. And typically when you get to that low, it doesn't really last for long. Typically a price, response triggers an increase in trading activity, which we haven't really seen as of yet because Bitcoin has been in that tight trading range. If we get a breakout of that trading range, you can see an uptick in volume, an uptick in volatility, and this open interest will definitely rise as more traders come in and looking for tradable zones.
So what's that support and resistance at for Bitcoin?
Short term, it's around 40K support is what we've been holding over the past 24 hours or so in Asia markets. You're seeing like brief dips, but then they've been very much supported by the buyers. Longer term, there's support that's been held over the past month, which is around 37, 38K. That's been very strong. And then resistance around 46K initially. That might stall an uptick in price over the next few days. But right now, we've been seeing some breakouts and clearing some of those key technical hurdles. So a major support level from here is around 50K or 50.9K. That is a 50% retracement of the prior down move. And this is very similar, almost symmetrical to what we saw during the last sell-off, which ended around July. And that move is pretty much very similar. And when you get to that 50% retracement, you tend to see a pullback of sorts. So I'm expecting that to play out over the next month or so.
Mm-hmm. And what do the funding rates in the perpetual futures market tell us about the cost of holding long positions?
Also very neutral. That hasn't moved over the past year. It's been either neutral to negative. And that just basically shows that there's been less conviction behind these price rallies in Bitcoin. The cycle low was around January 24th, and that was around, I think, 30K or sorts. And since then, that 30% move higher, you haven't seen a shift forward in the funding rates. Typically, funding rates turn positive when bullish sentiment is on the rise, and that shows that there's conviction behind these up moves. As of late, we haven't seen the volume confirm that. We haven't seen the open interest or the perpetual swaps markets confirm that. So that to me says that there is limited upside in these rallies. You're getting the short-term relief that's definitely tradable for the short-term traders, but over the long term, like we say in technicals, the long-term momentum has definitely shifted negative. So the odds of a new high is very, very low at this point.
And amid macro concerns, we hear some hawkish comments from the Federal Reserve on raising rates. Seems they're stuck in between a rock and a hard place, between allowing inflation to continue or drive the economy into a recession. Not an easy choice there.
Definitely not. I don't want to be in that seat. I think it's tough for the Fed. And right now, typically after the first rate hike, markets discount that, right? And we've heavily discounted these moves. They've talked their way into a taper, which is very much supportive for equities. It doesn't mean we're going to get like negative returns or any type of crazy washout. It just means that you're going to get lower returns than what we've been accustomed to during a low rate environment. That low rate environment was basically the regime for Bitcoin, right? We haven't been tested in any type of inflationary environment or any type of slow growth environment yet. We've been in this extended mid-cycle, which supported speculative assets. And now we're entering this uncharted territory, especially for cryptos, with risk assets, right? So what you look for is returns that are greater than the rate of inflation, which is what you get in any type of risk asset. And that's pretty much okay. But you're going to get that with some volatility. So when folks want to hedge their portfolio, it's just very tougher when you get higher correlations. So it's a long story, but in general, the macro concerns are definitely weighing on markets, but it's not an end all.
And finally, short term for Bitcoin, what do you see in its performance against altcoins?
That's been interesting. So altcoins have been outperforming as of late, especially Ether and some of the other layer 2 tokens. That's generally a risk on mode. And this chart just shows the altcoin season index from the Blockchain Center. It shows when there's about 70% of coins outperforming Bitcoin over a 90-day period. That typically signals altcoin season. But when I look at this chart, by then you're pretty much late in the game. So you want to make sure that you are on the right side of the market when altcoins are bottoming. And that's kind of what's happening now. For confirmation, you want to make sure that maybe this indicator reaches above 40 and stays there. That tells you that the risk on mode has been sustained from a low. And that would give you the short tail signal that we are in altcoin season. Right now, we're still in Bitcoin season because risk is still out there. And we really haven't seen a significant move yet into the altcoin space. But I expect, if we see that breakout, definitely altcoins would give you the higher rate of return in a risk-on environment.
Yeah, it's interesting to see Bitcoin being the mature asset it is compared to other cryptocurrencies. In times of uncertainty, people are flocking to Bitcoin. All right, Damanick, thanks for your analysis. Appreciate your insights. That was CoinDesk market analyst Damanick Dantes. Coming up, how Bitcoin is saving the lives of Ukrainian refugees. Next. Welcome back. Let's look at some headlines. Thailand's Security and Exchange Commission is banning the use of cryptocurrencies as a means of payment effective April 1st, citing money laundering concerns and the inability of the central bank to step in and provide assistance. The Thai SEC stressing that this is not a ban on crypto trading, which has become more popular among locals in the last 2 years, just a ban on the use of crypto for payments. Meanwhile, heading over to India, their new proposed tax law, which would impose a staggering 30% capital gains tax and a 1% tax deducted at source, coupled with an ongoing lack of clear regulation for crypto companies, may hasten the country's brain drain, say crypto entrepreneurs. Although there is little data or research to support the brain drain theory, industry executives tell CoinDesk the trend is apparent. And EU parliamentarians that supported the controversial provision seeking to limit proof of work mining could make one last stand if the Markets in Crypto Assets draft framework, the EU's sweeping regulatory package for cryptocurrencies, goes for a full parliamentary vote. Critics of the proposed provision also saying that suggesting Bitcoin could be transitioned out of proof of work may have revealed how little lawmakers understand blockchain. All right, and Bitcoin is providing a lifeline to Ukrainian refugees fleeing war with access to their savings cut off by the traditional banking system. Bitcoin stored on cold wallet USB keys are their digital gold. Joining us now to discuss is Alex Gladstein, Chief Strategist Officer at the Human Rights Foundation. Hi, Alex. Thanks for joining us. So for over a decade, you've been working with Ukrainian activists. Walk us through some of their stories now in relation to the war and how Bitcoin is playing a role.
Sure. Well, I think it's important to have some background context. As of today, Putin's war in Ukraine has caused about 10 million people to flee their homes. That's 10 million Ukrainians who've either been displaced internally or who are now refugees in European countries like Poland, Germany, Romania. More precisely, it's about 4 million Ukrainians who fled into the wider Europe. And this has happened, obviously, as you know, in a matter of days and weeks. This war has been a blitzkrieg. It's been extremely fast. When something happens so suddenly, and I hope everyone remembers, the kind of eerie kind of silence in the days leading up to the war, Ukrainians were trying to get on with their lives. Most people hoped that nothing would happen. Even in the West, experts didn't necessarily agree that there would be an invasion. In that fog of war scenario, not everybody was like preparing for such a thing. And when you are a family and your wealth is tied up in a house, perhaps, maybe in a stock market, maybe in, sort of retirement assets, these things are not liquid. You can't just like take them with you, right? And of course, immediately when the war began, the country's banking system froze up. Things became extremely restricted. Cash became a hot commodity. And the hryvnia, like the local currency in Ukraine, was technically frozen by the government at a particular exchange rate. But in the black market, obviously, it has cratered. So, for example, versus the Polish zloty, pre-war, it was an exchange rate of like 7-1. Today, it's 20-1. So the Ukrainian currency has completely collapsed. And people have been fleeing, their homes to the west of Ukraine and then beyond into Europe or elsewhere. And when they get to that new place, they may not have access to their savings. So the interesting wrinkle to this story, and the maybe like one bit of kind of hope for the future for similar situations, is that there is a technology that allows people to take their wealth with them. I've documented this previously in people's stories who've left places like Afghanistan and Syria, Venezuela, other large refugee crises. This is a new one. And you know what? The Ukrainians are equipped. According to chain analysis data, the country was top 5 in the world in terms of per capita Bitcoin and cryptocurrency usage. It's a very connected country. People are very mobile savvy. And, a lot of younger people, when they fled, they were able to take their wealth with them. There's a story today in CNBC about a guy that took 40% of his savings with him when he had to flee. And, when you bring your Bitcoin with you to Poland or Romania or whatever, you still control it. I mean, whether it's on a paper wallet or whether it's on a hardware wallet, or even if it's just on a phone wallet and you have a few $100 of Bitcoin on there, that's yours and it can't be confiscated or debased or devalued. And just from a short-term perspective, Bitcoin's value has remained pretty steady throughout the course of the war, hovering around $40,000. It hasn't done what the Ukrainian currency or Russian ruble have done in terms of like lose 30, 40, 50% of their value. So basically what we're seeing is people able to tap into a new technology. Once they get to Poland or Romania, they can then sell their Bitcoin quite easily for local currency to buy what they need. There are ATM networks and merchant networks, brick and mortar store networks all across Poland, for example, dozens and dozens of them, where you can go to a deli or an ATM location and you can just, without ID, without any sort of bank account, you can withdraw cash from your Bitcoin up to, I think, 1,000 euros per day worth. And that's really interesting and important to have that network. So I think that a lot of aid workers are thinking about this now. It's problematic to give away cash in a war zone. It's unsafe. It's risky. If you can do airdrops with Bitcoin, then that's something that people are looking at, and I think it can help a lot of folks, because once you get to Europe, that Bitcoin is liquid and can be traded and can be exchanged for fiat currency that can buy you whatever you need. So I think that's the sort of summary of what's happening.
Yeah. Wow, that was an incredibly eloquent summary, and putting the context into that. Thank you so much. Airdrops for Bitcoin, that's a fascinating concept. So I wonder, from the humanitarian aid, and we were showing images of the humanitarian crisis, refugees in Ukraine and trying to escape or trying to just survive this war. So what of their savings in their bank accounts, is that just completely inaccessible to them? And using Bitcoin, are they exclusively converting to EU currencies? Are they using Bitcoin for goods? Is it too early for that? Peer-to-peer exchanges?
Yeah, well, there's a historian at Columbia who studies monetary history. His name's Adam Tooze. And Adam wrote a great piece the other day, I think it came out yesterday, about this issue of the fact that, so some countries like Poland and Romania are allowing Ukrainians, if they've scrapped some cash together, they're allowing them to exchange that hryvnia for whether it's euros or zloty, etc., to a very small, like a few $100s worth. Obviously, these European nations don't want to take on the liability of this paper currency that's going to go to zero, or it's going to collapse almost entirely. So there's a huge debate happening right now at the ECB level about what to do with the hryvnia coming into Europe. Countries are trying to be generous, and they're trying to accept some of this essentially liability that may go to zero and give some more valuable fiat in return to try and help refugees. But there's going to be huge limitations on this process, and nobody wants to be left holding the hryvnia at this point. You could say the same thing about the ruble, which is also something that is going to become increasingly worthless over time. So you have...
How can people help? What are you recommending?
Well, look, at the moment, I think that it's important to understand that Bitcoin is liquid, that if you send Bitcoin to friends or family that that are in Ukraine or that are in Europe that have left, that they'll be able to sell that Bitcoin for fiat currency and buy food and goods and what they need. That's the first piece of information that's important. Once you grasp that, then maybe you want to incorporate it into your aid organizations' policies. I mean, at the Human Rights Foundation, we've been using Bitcoin to reach activists inside Belarus and other Eastern European countries for years. Our first fundraiser with Bitcoin was in 2013, and it was for the pro-democracy activists that were actually in Ukraine, pre-Maidan Square. So it's been something we've been thinking about for a long, long time. It's been something we've been doing for a long, long time. If you want to help and give back, the other thing I'd like to just sort of conclude with is that you can also donate Bitcoin to, like, for example, the Kiev Independent, which is a fantastic independent media source inside of Ukraine. They accept Bitcoin donations.
Yeah, great.
You could donate to a variety of humanitarian organizations. And I would just point out that, like, as far as cryptocurrency in its moment, it's worth noting that the Ukrainian government has raised more than $100 million of cryptocurrency for bulletproof vests and food and equipment. And that's a big deal. And I think that people should pause and take a look at that and realize that this monetary technology is here to stay.
Alex, incredibly well put. Thank you so much for joining us. Bitcoin for human rights, Bitcoin for good. I love it. All right. That was Human Rights Foundation Chief Strategy Officer Alex Gladstein. That's it for All About Bitcoin. I'm your host, Christine Lee, and we'll do it all over again tomorrow at 3 o'clock Eastern. Also join us tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Eastern for First Mover. You're watching CoinDesk TV.